Tonight we're going to talk about Numbers 13 and 14, a very pivotal time in Israel's history. The reason it's a pivotal time is because what happens in these two chapters is why children of Israel took 40 years to go from Egypt to Israel. If you look at a map, the distance between Egypt and Israel is not that far. I don't think it's over 100 miles. And so they actually, if they could have gotten passage through countries to get to Canaan, could have done it in a matter of weeks. But they were going to take their time, and they had spent a long time at Mount Sinai. One of the problems when we looked at chapter 11 and 12 is these people who had been slaves for 430 years as adults, had gotten a long way from their descendants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And most of them didn't really know the Lord. And they had been slaves, beaten down. And even though they were delivered by God, they had come to have a bad problem of complaining. And even though so many tragic things happened to them when they were slaves in Egypt, they were not ready to face things. And they just really couldn't believe that God would take care of them. That's what happened. So, in chapter 13, God is going, and this is interesting, if you get some time, study Deuteronomy chapter 1 through, in fact, Deuteronomy 1, chapter 1, verses 21 through 23 will explain a lot of what happens. Now, you say, why? Why would that? It actually goes back over this story that we're going to do tonight, 40 years later. All right, so Deuteronomy is written right before Moses dies, and as they go in the next book, Joshua, into the Promised Land, 40 years later. And chapter 1 repeats these things and sheds some light on it that is a little different. I want to read to you Deuteronomy 1, 21 through 23. Look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up and possess it, as the Lord God of your father has spoken to you. Do not fear or be discouraged. And every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us, and let them search out the land for us, and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go up, and of the cities into which we shall come. The plan pleased me well, so I took 12 of your men, one man from each tribe. Now, when you look at Deuteronomy 1 and you look at Numbers chapter 13, the idea of sending 12 spies looks like it came from the people. And Moses and God said, okay. And then God says, this is how you pick them. This is who you pick. Now, did God know what was going to happen in chapter 13, 14? I believe he did. But God tests us. And a lot of times we don't know what's going to happen. I think he knew it was coming. Moses, I don't think, did. And so, it's a difficult scripture because of some of these things. So if you look at your notes here, chapter 13, spies are chosen. So verse 1, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am given to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. So when you look at Numbers, the way it starts off, God says, we're going to do this, pick one man from each tribe of them. Notice that's not what they said in Deuteronomy when the people said something. This is the way God planned it out. He wanted one representative from each tribe. Goes over these. But the interesting thing are the ones that are mentioned in verse 8, from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, the son of Nun. Hoshea, the son of Nun, is Joshua. It explains that in verse 16. Moses liked calling him Joshua. And there's a little bit to do with what his name means and what's different there. Hoshea means salvation. Joshua means the Lord saves. Jesus is the Greek version of Joshua. It's a little bit interesting thing. That's why he's called Joshua. But he's actually the name is adjusted by Moses and God from just meaning salvation to meaning the Lord saves, which is what Jesus' name is. The other tribe that's very interesting is the one from Judah in verse 6. Judah has a guy named Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. Now Sunday I'm going to be preaching on Caleb. But tonight we'll mention him a little, but he's got a pretty good story when you use Deuteronomy and Joshua, and a lot of stuff in Joshua is pretty amazing. But the interesting later, before the kingdom falls, hundreds and hundreds of years later, and it's down in its two kingdoms, they call the southern kingdom Judah, which included Benjamin, Levites, and maybe some people from Simeon, or if they were still left. The northern kingdom, Samaria, where Elijah and Elisha was also a lot of times called Ephraim. So it's kind of interesting. So these tribes are going to have a lot to do with the history of the 12 tribes. Now, they picked them, but here's what I want you to notice also. Listen carefully to the directions of what these 12 spies are supposed to do. Ralph, you want to read verse 1 and 2?
Which chapter?
Chapter 13.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel, from each tribe of their fathers. You shall send a man, every one a leader among them.
Okay, that's it. That's what God said directly to Moses. Send them to see the land. That's why they brought it up. They wanted someone to see the land. So let them go see the land. Later, in verses 17 through 20, Moses gives them some more instructions. So let's look at that. Go up this way into the south and go up to the mountains and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. These are Moses' instructions, led by God, I'm sure, to say, but the direct word back in verse 2 from God was, look at the land. Moses said, go see it, see what it's like, come back and report, and see if it's good, and if it's rich, and whatever you do, be of good courage. Have courage. Bring us that report. And so they sent the men out. One man from each tribe. They go and do their jobs in verses 21 through 25. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rebob, near the entrance of Haman. So they went to spy out. That means they went to look at it. They went to check it out and see what it was like. And they had to kind of go stealthily as spies because they were among Canaanites. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron, Athaman, Sheshai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. Now, the descendants of Anak are giants, very tall people. And indirectly, Goliath was one of them. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Zon in Egypt is thrown in there. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch of one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. The place was called the valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down there, and they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. They found unbelievable fruit and grapes of great size. And they had to put a big old giant cluster on them and bring them back. So they did what they were told. And they brought back the report. And verses 26 to the end of the chapter tells what report they came back and said. In verse 27, we went. It is a land that flows with milk and honey. The land of milk and honey. The people, though, who dwell there are strong. They have cities. They would have walls, like Jericho had walls. That was one of the cities there. And very strong. they lived by the sea and the banks of the Jordan, then that was what they reported, just as reported. Then Caleb, this is the first place he talks, he gets everybody quiet down and he said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. All right, we got this. Let's go. That's what Caleb says. But the men who had gone up with him, and I don't believe this included Joshua, you'll know why in a little bit, said, we are not able to go against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So 10 of the people said, yeah, it's a rich land, but we can't take them. They're stronger than we are. They gave the children a bad report, verse 32. The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. So think of them as like short. And they saw these big, robust men who had not been slaves, and then they saw giants in the land. He said, we were like grasshoppers, verse 33, in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. And they basically gave a bad report. So we can't do it. Caleb said, what are we waiting on? Now, these people believed the 10 spies. But when they were sent there, God said, just go up there and see the land, come back and give a report. And then he also said, I'm giving it to you. Look at verse 2 again. I'm giving you this land. The decision about going wasn't really up to them. The decision was, it's yours, go get it. Caleb knew that and brought that up. And by the way, what happened to all those cities 40-something years later? What happened to Jericho, which was the one with the grandest wall?
They were destroyed.
Yeah.
The wall wasn't a problem at all.
No.
God brought the wall down. They didn't have to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Also, interestingly enough, and they were so frightened of these people, when what they didn't know was those people were frightened of them.
Mm-hmm.
Over in Joshua, Rahab the harlot, who hid, when they sent spies 40 years later, they only sent 2. They didn't send 12. And she hid the spies, and she said, we know what happened at Red Sea. We're doomed. Red Sea was 40 years before the story of Rahab. For 40 years, they knew they were coming. For 40 years, they had heard what happened in Egypt and the Red Sea. But, like I said, these people were weak and didn't know what was going to happen. So when we go to chapter 14, the people rebel. One of y'all want to read the first 5 verses?
I will. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, would God that we have died in the land of Egypt, or would God we have died in this wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? And they said one to another, let us make a captain, and let us return into Egypt. And Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel.
Okay, so the children of Israel cried all night. And they said, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword? Another commentary is, God sent us here to kill us. That's what another translation says there. That our wives and children should become victims. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? We're going to pick a new leader, and we're going back to Egypt. Moses and Aaron didn't argue with them or fuss with them. They just fell on their faces in front of the congregation. Verse 5. Now, that's an amazing story. Like I told you, there was an album called So You Want to Go Back to Egypt. If these people had picked a leader and gone back to Egypt and said, we're willing to be slaves, after 600 of their best army had been killed, Pharaoh was probably killed, and they all lost their firstborn son. Do they have any idea what their reception in Egypt would have been? You know, you think they were treated bad before. They were killing the firstborn Jewish kids and all that kind of stuff. And so they're like little baby children. They don't know what's good for them. And so they don't know what else to do. They wave and cry. They say, God's trying to kill us. He intended to bring us out here to kill us. They don't have any faith in God at all. And so, and Aaron and Moses are just so shook up about it, they just fall on their faces. I think they probably fell on their faces and they're crying out to God. So what's going to happen? It's a good question. Well, let's see what happens in verses 6 through 10. Verse 6 through 9 is Joshua and Caleb. They stand up and say something. They don't like it. And so let's see what they say here. You want to read that?
Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Now all the congregation said to stone them with stones.
Okay, just stop there for a minute. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. So Joshua and Caleb come up. No, let's go, let's go. God delights in us. It's our land. The people are our bread. They're already defeated. We've got this. And the response of the people was, let's stone them to death. We don't want to listen to anything Joshua and Caleb have to say. I don't know where the other 10 spies were. They were being quiet. But when I told you about Rahab hiding the spies over in the book of Joshua, I want you to listen to this. She says to him as she's hiding the spies in Joshua 2, Rahab the harlot Canaanite, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now, she was a harlot. She ran a business and everything. And she said, when we heard about what happened at the Red Sea, and then the 2 pagan kings on the other side of the Jordan, our hearts melted. We have no hope. You talk about a defeated people. During the Gulf War in the early 90s, Saddam had a 1 million-man army. It just melted. Now his guard is 50,000 men in Baghdad. They were a different kind of sort. But he just put people and weapons and put them up there thinking that by some miracle they were going to stop the army that invaded. And as soon as if you remember, as soon as we started firing shots, they just surrendered. They gave up. They didn't want to fight. So that was a different time, but it just shows you that Caleb and Joshua see it, and the response of the people is stoned to death. We don't want to hear it. We've had it. Well, when they, in the same verse, I didn't let you finish reading the verse, and I'll let you finish it now. In the same verse where they decided to stone Joshua and Caleb to death, and probably also they were going to do that to Moses and Aaron. Tell us the rest of that verse.
Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the meeting before all the children of Israel.
Okay, God shows up. They they said, we're going to stone Joshua and Caleb. Guys, I've had enough. God shows up. When he shows up, things change. Now, if you look at your notes here, a few things we want to see. God appears. Ultimately, God tests if we have real faith. Actually, this is a famous story in the history of Israel, just almost like the Red Sea and the Passover. You ask a Jewish person about it, they'll tell you real quick. They blew it here. They were God's special people, called, and they blew it big time. And God was testing them, I believe, to show what they were really like. And they were whining and crying, oh, our wives, oh, our children, they'll just destroy them. And what I want you to see on the notes, it says, sin and self cost. There's a great cost when we let sin and selfishness get in the way. And God offers to destroy all of them and build up a new people through Moses. Now, I believe God knows the beginning and the end. He said he knows the ending and the beginning at the same time. We don't. But God was going to show himself real. Because see, 40 years later, when that people got there, they were ready to go. They knew God. They were ready. But it was going to take 40 years. So anyway, he offers to wipe them out, turn everything over, and just raise up new people under Moses. So what do you think Moses' response is? Starting in verse 13.
And Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear it, for by your might you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, Lord, are among these people, and that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands above them. And you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now if you kill these people as one man, then the nations which have heard of your fame will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people to the land which he swore to give them, therefore he killed them in the wilderness. And now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundantly in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgressions, but he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of their fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of these people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven these people from Egypt until now.
Okay. And then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, from Numbers 14. Now, he says in verse 22, they've seen my glory. They've seen me test them. They've tried me 10 times. They will not see the land. But my servant Caleb will, verse 24. And he says that through verse 25. And what he's saying here is this. And he says, I will pardon them. I won't kill them now. But they'll never, as adults, the adults will never see the promised land. He gets to that a little bit later. In fact, everyone from the age of 20 and up, unless they're Caleb or Joshua, won't see the promised land. They won't get to go there. Remember how they said, well, our children will be killed. The children are going to grow up. They're going to get the land. But for 40 years, you're going to wander in the wilderness. And every one of you are going to die and never get to the promised land. The book of Hebrews talks about this in chapter 3 and 4. And it says, don't be like our forefathers who didn't really believe that God could do what he said he would do. And so, we see that Moses interceded. Now, did Moses change God's mind? Personally, I don't believe he did change God's mind. I think God knew what was going to happen. God already knew what the people were like. But we don't know what God knows. And Moses did a whopper prayer. Moses said, basically, don't do this for your reputation's sake. You said you'd deliver them the land, give them the land, because of your name needs to be glorified among all the nations, which is one of the reasons why God's doing all this. And so the great prayer and everything, and God said, okay, I'll pardon them. They're not dying today, but they'll never get to go in the promised land. But my servant Caleb will. He'll get to go. And not only will Caleb, but Joshua, as we get further in, God rebukes them, He punishes them, He delivers, He answers, He blesses. And like He said in chapter 13, verse 2, I want to give you the land. He told them that. All right, well, real quickly, just show you a few things more in here. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, verse 27, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who complain against me? I've heard the complaints which the children of Israel make against me. Remember they said, God brought us out here to kill us. It wasn't just Moses and Aaron, Joshua and Caleb. God hears what we say. Say to him, verse 28, as I live, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness. All of you who were numbered according to your entire number from 20 years old and above, except for Caleb and Joshua. Now, I want to ask you something. Are you a teenager when you're 19? Yeah. Teenager, 19. The term teenager is 13 through 19. How many 19-year-olds were there that day? They probably went, God cut it at 20. Remember, 20 was age in one of our previous number things.
Right.
They had to be 20 years old to be counted as men of war. None of the men of war were going to get to go to the promised land. None of that 600,000 army of men got to go in, except Joshua, Caleb. Oh, by the way, Caleb is about 35 to 40 at this time. So his kids are probably under 20. So that's a very important thing there. Now, let's find out what happened to the other 10 spies. It tells us what happened to them. Verse 36. Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report of the land, those very men who were brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of the men who went to spy the land. Those 10 men who gave a bad report and turned their hearts against God, they died. They got the plague and died. They made a mistake. They saw all the wonder of the land, and all they could see were the giants of the land. We're going to be preaching on Caleb Sunday. We'll get back to those giants 40-something years later. You want to go ahead and read what happens over the book of Joshua and find out some of that stuff. But it's a sad day. They will wonder for 40 years. Now, the last little bit before we end, verses 39 through 45, you get a chance to look at, tells that a few of the people, some of the people, said, okay, we made a mistake, God. We're going to go attack. Now, we'll win the victory. We'll take the land. God said, I'm not going with you. You'll lose. You know, there's people like that today. They have just a little bit of religion, and they think God is like their taxi driver. Okay, God, yeah, we made a mistake. God said, no, you're going to wander 40 years and die and think, no, we don't want to miss out on the promise now. So they got a little army up, and they went to attack after God told them not to. The interesting little verse is, look at verse You know, in verse 40 they say, here we are. We will go to the place where the Lord has promised, for we have sinned. We're sinners. God, forgive us. We will go and win. Moses said in verse 41, now why do you transgress the command of the Lord? For this will not succeed. Do not go up lest you be defeated by your enemies. For the Lord is not among you. God's not with you. But boneheads are boneheads. And so they went up and they attacked. And the Amalekites and Canaanites, verse 45, drove them back. It was a worthless endeavor. When Christians try to act in their own flesh and power without the strength and presence of God, we're doomed to failure. It was too late. It was time to pick up the tent and wander for 40 years. And the saddest part of all of that is when Moses said, and the Lord said, I'm not going to be with you. Over in Samuel, Eli's sons took the Ark of the Covenant, went to attack the Philistines, scared the Philistines half to death. But God wasn't with them. His presence had departed. Even though the ark was there, God didn't fight. It was a horrible defeat for Israel. We can't live the Christian life in our own strength, outside of God's will. We're going to close with prayer.